and welcome to the first in a series of Datamaran podcasts featuring market stories on digitalization and the future of business. We see now more than ever that organizations are attempting to navigate an increasingly disruptive risk landscape. In a series of in-depth interviews with business leaders, policymakers, and academics, we will explore how the future of work is more digital, more innovative, and more connected than ever. Today, we're sitting down with Datamaran CEO Marjella Lecourt-Alma. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you, Susie?
Doing okay, hanging in there.
Yeah.
So thinking about the broader themes of digitalization and the future of business, how is Datamaran currently navigating the disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic?
That's a very good question. It feels to me that we're working currently at 3 different levels. So level 1 is to see, what kind of operational measures can we take as a company to continue the work as much as possible in a very different setting, and coming to terms with what that different setting actually means and how long this will last. I think the timeline is probably the most uncertain issue within this new context that we're all of a sudden faced with. So within that first level, it's about figuring out how to best work remotely, stay in touch with our colleagues, stay connected, amongst employees that are in 12 different countries globally, and 3 main offices, and also stay in touch with our clients and partners and really understand what's going on. I think that's the hardest part at the moment. We've always been a digital company and always been proud that we had a digital solution, but I think this is taking remote working to a whole different level. And we very quickly have to come to terms with that on how to optimize it, and also in terms of employee well-being. How are people really doing? It's sometimes very hard to get that real sense from a Google Hangout conversation or a Zoom. We have all these channels, we have all these means, but nothing beats face to face. I think that's a hard reality too. Then on a second level, we're very much trying to keep things as normal as possible. So the plan that we had set out for 2020 still applies. The teams still have their mandates that we agreed in January. In January is always the time where we say, okay, let's do this in terms of product development. Let's try to reach these goals in terms of business development and thought leadership and content creation. So we're continuing that as much as possible, while also at the same level, and that's the third level, trying to really think hard about what might be the world post-crisis, and if there are any things we should do in this period to be best prepared and ready for that, considering it will be unlikely that we will go back to the normal that was there just a couple of weeks ago. What we found normal, and normal for us very much, was traveling places to see people, to see our clients, to go to conferences. What we're sensing now is that, now more than ever, people might embrace more of a digital working environment, might not go back to normal in terms of, the face-to-face activity that we've had in the past, the recent past. But even more so, I guess, in terms of like the business reality, in terms of understanding that there are risks out there that might seem immaterial today, but very quickly can become material to business tomorrow. Which fits, I guess, with what Datamaran always tried to do from the beginning, is to shed a spotlight on external risks pertaining to environmental, social, governance, but also geopolitical and technology issues. And that's maybe the silver lining for us as a business. Of course, we want to continue to do well in this space, but also for the world, that there's a new enlightenment around the need for looking beyond the day-to-day, the business as usual, and trying to have more of a balance between work and life and nature and profit. So there's an opportunity, I think, for us to rethink how we have been doing business in relation to the world around us. And it seems that there's a clear message coming from planet Earth telling us that we're actually not the ones that are in control. I've been thinking a lot about, like last year, 2019, we saw Greta Thunberg, speaking at these UN summits with a lot of passion, trying to convince the people in the room, do more, work harder, you're in charge. And it felt like, that was the way to go about it. If you convince world leaders and business leaders to think differently and to take the climate change, the climate crisis as an example. If you get them to think differently, then that might have an impact. I think what we're seeing right now is that none of us are in control. This crisis, this virus that's out there, it doesn't discriminate. We're all in our homes in front of a screen trying to figure out how to how to keep going and anticipate what will happen next. But a big lesson here is that we're not so in control as we thought we were. And I'm hopeful that this, let's call it a mandatory reflection period, will actually turn into an opportunity where we will look at the world differently and rethink how we have been, using up resources, and in terms of, how you go about the work itself and
your day-to-day life and
the day-to-day life, but and also in terms of the purpose of your company, right? Do you really have a license to operate? Should you be there? I think all those essential questions are coming up now, and we're seeing them in a different way, very different than before.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying in terms of rethinking the way business is done, and having sort of this forced opportunity to do that, it really brings up a concept that we've talked a lot about in the past year. Already in 2019, we were saying, 2020 was the year that all of these goals companies put forth around ESG issues, it was really sort of the deadline or the time that they would come to fruition.
Yeah.
But of course, 2020's here, things have been disrupted. Even before the disruption, not all of the goals were met. So it really brings up this concept of authenticity. And it's a concept that we talked about last week in our private financial services event with the Datamaran community. Evan Harvey, head of sustainability for NASDAQ, actually brought it up, saying that a silver lining of this crisis will be shedding a light on, how authentic companies actually are about their ESG strategy, and whether or not that really is integrated into the broader corporate strategy, into the broader risk management process.
Yeah.
So how do you think companies can really prove or reinforce that they are authentic about their ESG goals and strategy?
In a way, that's the beauty of a crisis like this. It will show very clearly who's helping and who's not helping. So we've been capturing, corporate initiatives on the Datamaran website since a few weeks now, in terms of the actions that the healthcare industry is taking, and also in terms of banks that are being more lenient in terms of payments and loans. So that information's out there in the public, and it's almost like we're going back to the traditional concept of corporate responsibility to see who's really stepping up to the plate right now, and the world's watching, and that's the only thing that the media is reporting on, beyond the, let's say, the coronavirus numbers in terms of infections and deaths. Then it's about, okay, what's the private sector doing in collaboration with government? I saw an interesting article yesterday, I think it was in the FT, which was around the need for a new social contract between governments and the private sector. I remember last week there was it was Philips, actually, the Philips CEO, who said the reason why we haven't been able to ramp up the production of ventilators more quickly and other medical equipment is because we got the request from government so late. It could have been a couple of weeks earlier. We would have been in a better spot. So I think it also makes you rethink, if the private sector is the sector with the capabilities to quickly innovate and come with solutions, then those relationships between governments that are in charge and that can make these kinds of decisions as to lockdown and quarantine, and then that type of collaboration, that kind of relationship needs to be rethought and needs to be more agile in a way. Because I was initially surprised when all the measures started to take effect. Felt very much like World War II situation, where you are back to relying on government to take measures, which are typically way more slow. The army coming back into play, and you think, okay, normally in my day-to-day work, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about new technologies, and how quickly things are changing, and the possibilities new technologies are bringing. Where are they now? Why are they not? Why are we not talking about that? So I think that's another part that we will start to see, is a new relationship, I hope, between government and the private sector, where things can happen more quickly. And in terms of authenticity, I think you can see it very clearly, who is really stepping up to the plate right now, but also who has forward-looking insight. This company in Ohio, Battelle, with this technology that is able to sterilize face masks many times. I wonder why was that already in play 2 years ago? Why did they believe it was a good thing to build that technology, and how did they get the funding for it? So innovation and the slow-moving governmental action, somehow that needs to we need to connect that and marry that.
It's really important, the point you made about different stakeholders needing to collaborate on these types of issues. And, since our former days at GRI together, thinking about the multi-stakeholder approach, and having, those different types of stakeholders and influencers involved in the discussion around, what is a company's responsibility to the environment, to society, in terms of their own internal governance practices. This crisis really, puts a bright light on that piece as well. it also, in terms of thinking about this forward-looking mentality, it's encouraging to see that more and more in sort of the mainstream world, we're seeing this discussion around dynamic materiality or more dynamic approaches to materiality, a concept that was very much at the heart of why we built Datamaran 6 years ago, where we really were promoting this more dynamic approach to materiality. So it's encouraging to see that company or that, institutions like the World Economic Forum, other companies, other academics are really starting to promote that concept too. It's catching on. But, I think as a concept, it makes sense, but practically it requires a bit of unpacking. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that. What is a dynamic approach to materiality? What does that actually entail, since that's very much at the heart of what Datamaran as a software does?
Yeah, no, I think when we started Datamaran, you were there, 2014, we were frustrated with, working in a field where these non-financial issues, these environmental, social governance issues were essentially disconnected from leadership, from corporate strategy, from risk management, from, let's say, all the mainstream business processes that exist in business. It was very much an exercise that was done on the side. A lot of times in environments where you meet many, many passionate people that get the topics, that are, committed to making their companies more sustainable, but didn't really have the means nor the connections internally to do that in a very serious way. So I think what we've seen in the past 5-6 years, since we started that, is changes in regulations that I think put a lot of additional spotlight on the importance of these issues. By the European Union, the taxonomy, the technical expert group, the EU non-financial reporting directive, initiatives like that. So the regulatory landscape really evolved around these issues fast, and the effect of that has been that it brought in different stakeholders, internal stakeholders to the table that previously said, that's not me, that's our CSR team, that's our corporate citizenship stuff. So I think that's been accelerating somewhat, but still, frankly, a lot of companies, while taking it more seriously, were not really actioning it in a more significant or fundamental way. So if you think about, the purpose of your business, your license to operate, should you be there or not? Are you still an investable business? Are you a business that should be there in future, that does not destroy, value, but creates value in a positive way, in a future-proof way? I think that has, through this crisis, we are seeing that leadership is starting to think very differently there. I was talking earlier this week with Yannis Ioannou, a professor at London Business School, has an online course on sustainability, and he said he's never experienced so many C-suite and board members to attend this course, because all of a sudden they realize these issues, whether it's COVID-19 now or climate risk, but it's all connected. These issues are connected. They're external to the company, but COVID-19 brings the message home that all of a sudden they might become very financially material and disrupt in a massive way. So I think there's the realization that you need data to build that awareness internally, understanding what these potential topics might be. So around COVID-19, what are the topics that we see connected there? That's, of course, ecosystems, biodiversity, pollution, climate change, social issues, your workforce, all connected. So that's very clear. So the need for that kind of information, but also the business processes that you need to have in place in terms of your governance. And maybe, and we're doing some research on that right now, maybe the companies that were most aware were able to act faster than those that were not aware of these kinds of risks. So those companies out there that are now really acting and that are helping and contributing to solving this crisis, were they somehow more prepared? Dynamic materiality, brings this idea home that this is no longer something you can do, an exercise you can do maybe once every 3 years, where you say, okay, let's bring in a consultant. We're gonna talk about the long list of ESG or sustainability topics. We're going to prioritize those for our sustainability report, and then we're going to report on that. That exercise, if that's still done in such a limited way, I don't think those companies are going to be fit for the future. And the future is now. We've been thrown into the future. But it's about really connecting these issues to core business processes, involving the C-suite, creating responsibilities at the board level, integrating these issues not just in a separate CSR report, but really integrating it into the annual report, allocating budget to it. Oftentimes what we've been hearing as well is, yeah, we don't have real budget to do this properly, and our team is small, so can we still work with you? we cannot money. And oftentimes we said yes, because we wanted to help the sustainability professional within these companies. But I think now what we will see, what we anticipate, is that this will become a leadership issue. And the fact that the World Economic Forum published this study on dynamic materiality, I think, is just a signpost of that. 5 years ago, sustainability was not yet a Davos World Economic Forum ready conversation. It wasn't there. But with these single issues coming to the forefront, loud and clear, it is. And I think that is exciting, because that means that real change is possible. If you can get the right people behind it with the the responsibility, the accountability, and the ability to make decisions, simultaneously the investor community, then real change is possible, and it can happen quite fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Companies are really, having to adapt faster. And I think, to your point about sustainability professionals, really being in a critical position, especially right now in a time of crisis, is so evident in terms of, the companies that we work with. Majority of them are being asked to, be in the war room and be a key player in terms of their COVID-19 response. And, to your point, I think a key reason why is because, one, they're trained to deal with such complexity. ESG issues are complex in nature. They're completely interconnected. It's the scale is massive, right? If we think about climate change, how do you start to build a climate change strategy as a company? Because you can take so many different approaches. But also, it's about having, an ability to focus on what needs to happen now in the short term, and then what needs to happen in the long term. To your point, what will the world look like post-crisis? And we need to already prepare for that world, because it's going to come, and the dust will settle, but things will undoubtedly look different. And, in terms of speed and needing to adapt, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of companies are really needing to fulfill their vision around digital transformation. It's a concept that we've been hearing a lot about in the past years as well. But I don't think companies really understood what digital transformation meant until the current crisis.
Yeah.
So in terms of, what we've seen at Datamaran, since Datamaran is a cloud-based platform, it's a digital platform, it's using analytics to pull data from a variety of publicly available sources. How are you seeing the companies that we work with using digital solutions to help them transform and be a more digitally enabled or digitally secure company?
Yeah. So thankfully, for our business and our employees, we've seen an uptick in interest in the tool, because the only way to do business right now is to do it digitally. And for those companies that want to work on their ESG risk management and materiality, benchmarking, all those related exercises, the way to do that, Datamaran enables that process in a digital way. So in that sense, we see that companies still want to continue the work, but need to do that in a different way than ever before. So that opens them up to looking for digital solutions more proactively, and having to understand what is possible in terms of digital transformation. Another part of that we're seeing at the moment is also this notion of speed. So all companies we talk to at the moment, they say, we have very little time, because we're all being called into meetings around COVID-19. We're all distracted right now. We're all trying to figure out how we can work from home. So the fact that you have technologies available that can speed the work up, not just do the work, but also do it faster, also helps at the time where people feel quite paralyzed because of a situation that is so new that they have to, almost like drop everything and focus on that. So this is also, I think, where we're seeing that our clients and new clients that we're getting at the moment appreciate this idea that they can still do a good job in terms of like their ESG risk analysis, not compromising the quality of that exercise, because that's really important, but do it in a very rapid way. And that's a massive benefit of technology, beyond the fact that it can happen in a digitally enabled environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Business as usual and in some capacity continues, and companies still need to report out on their focus areas. They still need to engage with their investors, who I think are asking much more tough and specific questions about what is your process to understand and, more importantly, monitor the external landscape when it comes to these types of issues.
I think that
and that monitoring.
And that goes to your earlier point of authenticity, right? So do you bother to find this information? Do you invest in putting processes in place in your company and appointing people to look proactively for this kind of information? And do you have the tools available to help you do that? If you now tell an investor, oh, actually, we're not doing that because, either we don't see the relevance of it or the tools don't exist, I think both reasons are not acceptable anymore, nor true. So that, will prove to be an acceleration of how these issues, how these ESG issues are becoming elevated in business today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of what is the palpable relevance of ESG issues, sustainability issues, we're seeing a lot of news articles now saying that ESG funds are outperforming other funds right now in a time of crisis. So I think that's going to be really interesting to unpack, looking at why that is. And it gets to your point about, having process, having strong governance policies, really, being mindful of both the short and the long term concepts that we've been talking about for a long time. But to your earlier point about leadership, I think what's really exciting is that we're seeing more and more different types of experts internally at companies getting involved in these processes and building their own competencies and expertise around ESG,
Yeah.
one of which is the risk management team. And, I think when we look at traditional approaches to materiality around ESG issues and traditional approaches to understanding external risks, there's a lot of similarities. So we're starting to see more integration there. And I'm just curious, on that, what do you see as the future in terms of the role of the corporate sustainability, of the corporate ESG professional post-crisis?
Yeah. I think for now, they're a central hub of information around everything that's going on in the world of ESG and sustainability. And they have a role to, educate people internally, and then to mandate different departments to take a specific topic or practice further. So I think they will be the integrators more than
Mm-hmm.
more than ever. I think in many cases it's still a separate team where things happen in isolation, where the team tries to gather information from different teams and put together the sustainability report. But I think this is going to be flipped on its head, and it's going to be much more about proactively sharing what they know about these risks and opportunities. Then their challenge will be to communicate that in a way that is fits with the right business narrative of the company. So when we talk about risk management, and we frame ESG as external risks, all of a sudden you get the attention of risk people that might not in the past not been interested in having a conversation around sustainability or CSR, thinking that's the soft stuff. All of it,
Mm-hmm.
when you reframe it as external risks, you have a different conversation. So we've seen on the corporate side a lot of collaboration between sustainability professionals and different business units, compliance teams, legal teams, risk management teams, public affairs teams. So really making it a cross-cutting exercise across the business, but not just horizontally, also vertically. So as you
Mm-hmm.
said, sustainability professionals right now being called into these war rooms because of the interconnectedness of issues, but also called in to provide information to boards on these ESG topics, and advising on what kind of governance structures would be appropriate. So that's happening in corporates. I think within the investor community, we see similar things. You used to have separate ESG products, and now ESG data needs to be integrated into everything that already exists. So in a way, we might make ourselves disappear, as a sustainability professional. Ultimately, I think we will win if we're not there, because we have created sustainable businesses and sustainable capital markets. Another very interesting development that we're kind of seeing very close by, because we're a product company. So we're using technology to scan external landscapes to understand, which ESG issues are out there and which ones are relevant. We are seeing the interest from a lot of mainstream service providers to integrate our product into something that already exists and has existed for many, many years. Risk management, we talked about that. That's one. Service providers wanting to have a more complete solution there, not just internal enterprise risk management, but also the external piece. We're also seeing it with law firms. We're seeing it with PR firms. in terms of services like reputation management, M&A due diligence. So that I find a very interesting avenue for us as a business to explore, to see where can that data set, and that platform, looking at all these non-financial ESG issues, how can it be integrated into mainstream services? Because in that way, we get an even bigger push, service providers collectively, bringing it into all different, all sorts of avenues within companies and their clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings up a good point about stakeholder engagement. We touched upon that before, but just what are you seeing now in terms of traditional stakeholder engagement models being disrupted? We can't convene at conferences and exchange expertise to really say, what issues do you see coming up? We can't convene our different experts at a table to say, what do you see as the priority issues for our company? So how do you see digitalization impacting stakeholder engagement over, the long term during the crisis, but also post-crisis?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think, most stakeholders, you'll be able to find them online. Technology gives us an opportunity to listen, to listen what people are saying on social media, what consumers are thinking and saying on Twitter and Instagram and channels like that. So I think there's the stakeholder listening opportunity, and that's a thing that we identified already a few years back, and we started to listen actively there. But of course, there's also the direct stakeholder engagement that is oftentimes best done in person, as we know. But now we're seeing those limitations there. So we are also thinking now, how can we best enable that experience through a digitally enabled environment, beyond a survey into a more proactive workshop that can be done online. So I think that those two parts, the listening part is there, which is also, I think, very powerful, because people might not say everything to you when you directly engage, but you can find them elsewhere and you can find these opinions. And then when you bring people in to directly engage with, how can we optimize digital tools? How can we integrate a Datamaran platform within a Zoom context or a WebEx context, and how can we optimize that direct stakeholder engagement in the best way possible? So those are big things on our mind right now in terms of product development and innovation at Datamaran.
Mm-hmm. And that ties into the monitoring piece as well, just having an ability to monitor these stakeholder views, listen to these stakeholder views, not just at one point in time, but over time, to ensure that any changing expectations or perspectives are really captured in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and when you speak about dynamic materiality, it's not the fact that the issues change, right? So you could argue 20 years ago climate change was just as important as it is now. It's just that the entire the context around climate change has changed through new regulations and different stakeholders coming to the table on that, and of course also we're starting to see it very close to home, how the natural environment around us is changing. So the ability to understand what those issues are, but also the dynamics, the ongoing dynamics around those issues in terms of regulatory transition and competitive environment and consumer behavior, all those things. yeah, are very evident right now, and technology has an important role to play there to capture that and to proactively inform companies on what is changing and why it might be changing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in terms of the unpacking digitalization and the future of business, clearly this conversation shows there are a variety of elements, important elements to it. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to conclude with, or if you were to summarize, some of the key points that we mentioned into a final statement, how would you do that? Not an easy task, I think.
Maybe a couple of sentences on that then. Yeah, so post COVID-19, the world will not be as we left it. We are all in a tough crisis right now and worried about, our family and our businesses and this notion of going back to normal. Will we go back to normal? I think we should try to look at it also from the perspective of not wasting or not letting a good crisis go to waste, in the sense that we are enabled to do things differently going forward. And I feel like this is where the opportunity is for all of us to do things differently going forward, and how we how we treat the environment, our employees, our suppliers, our partners, and let's not mess up again.
All right. That's definitely a big task for all of us, but to your point, we have some time, some mandated time to work through that. So thanks so much for taking the time to be here today and to kick off our first Datamaran podcast series.
My pleasure.
Up next, we're gonna hear from some companies that we work with, some academics, some policymakers. So look forward to see how this discussion evolves over the next year.
Thank you so much, Susie. It was great speaking with you.
Thanks.